me just, okay. Hi, everybody. Um, Today, I'm going to talk about harsh speech. Let me tell you, in our daily lives, when there are quarrels between two persons, it's normally harsh speech. And normally, when you feel resentment towards another, it's usually harsh speech. And when couples fight and have aversion towards one another, hard to forgive, let me tell you, is harsh speech. And can you imagine like a marriage, right? It's like this wall, a cement wall. And every time harsh speech is actually exchanged, it's like a crack on the wall. It just comes down like that. And it's very hard to cement and patch back, right? So I think it's a very important topic to learn. And that's the reason why I invested a lot of time and energy to prepare this series on right speech. Okay, shall we start? Now, minimize your screen sharing. And so you just focus on the screen. Yeah. All right. Let's start. Now, the Buddha taught about the Four Noble Truths: suffering, cause of suffering, and the end of suffering. And he gives us a formula, right? And that formula is in the Noble Eightfold Path under the Fourth Noble Truth. So, under morality, he says we need to exercise right speech, right action, and right livelihood. So, under right speech, what are the four kind of speeches we have to avoid? I have covered forced speech and divisive speech. So, for this today and next week, I will cover harsh speech. Right. Okay. This always, let me just give it a while. Uh-huh. I don't seem to be able to move my slide.
Fong, you might want to click on anywhere in your screen and then you move left or right button.
Okay. Um, oh, okay. All right. Now, the revision. The Dharma bites on harsh speech is structured in this sequence. We are now looking at why we have to exercise restraint. Later on, the last two sessions on the right speech series, I will talk about how, and that's under purification of the mind. Now, we are talking about avoidance, which is abstain from. Today, we're talking about harsh speech. And next Saturday, I'm going to tell you how to refrain, and that's under the doing good part. Right? We will cover four sections on this topic. First, the definition. We always must start with the definition. Then we look at the motivations behind harsh speech, the causation. Without knowing the cause, then it's very difficult for you to eliminate harsh speech. Then why we should avoid it. And lastly, how to reduce harsh speech. Let's start with the definition. Okay, let's go through the words. It is rough. It means no finesse, no tact. It is hard. It is hurtful. And is offensive. It provokes anger. Now, all these definition of harsh speech have one thing in common, right? It stirs up angry feelings. If the person is not angry, does it mean that you have not exercised harsh speech? No. Why? You look at the definition. If what you say disturb another person's mind, it is harsh speech because it's unconducive to concentration. It causes ill will, worry, restlessness, anxiety, and fear, etc., for the recipient. Therefore, harsh speech can be divided into three main groups according to their predominant features. Based on these, harsh speech therefore covers a whole spectrum of unskillful communication, ranging, you can read on your own. Okay, so it covers abusive speech, insults, and sarcasm. So the range is so wide, it covers a situation where one is frustrated or irrational to rude, critical, denigrating, insulting, and sarcastic. So it covers to also swearing and fierce quarrels. People swear for different reasons. Some people swear to express intense emotions, some in response to pain or misfortune. But the type of profanity that is considered harsh speech is that which is intended to offend, intimidate, or denigrate a person. Next, we look at motivations to fully understand the cause. We should know by now, right, that harsh speech arises because of the sense of self, right? The ego. Because of the ego, we have the three roots of evil. Do you remember what they are? Loba, dosa, and moha. Greed, hatred, and delusion. Our three best friends in life that hinders us from enlightenment. As long as we're not enlightened, we will always have these three roots. And okay, these are the three unwholesome roots that underlie all our actions until the day we become enlightened. Even if they do not arise in response to suitable causes and conditions, they are still present in us. Loba, the greed, is wanting, that craving, that mental state that drives us to pursue sense objects through our six sense bases that will give us a pleasant feeling. Now, this includes mental craving for praise, for gain, etc. So if someone comes to you and say, I have no craving, that means the person does not know himself well, or he thinks he's a saint or an arahant. All of us have wanting. As we progress in the path, we just want less and less, and we become more and more contented. The mind, quieter. Now, coming to terms with beings and situations. When we want something and cannot get, we are also fine. Now, dosa, aversion, arises because we resist unpleasant feelings. In other words, not coming into terms with the way things are. And as long as we see ourselves as self and not fully realize the Four Noble Truths, we have delusion. And because of the three evil roots, we all have these mental states. Yeah. So let us look at greed, that greed. So we commit harsh speech because we believe it is the only way to get what we want. For example, the desire to fit in, to be accepted, to be popular, to be looked up to, etc. You might find this strange, but a study actually found that people believe that the nicer or more agreeable you are at work, the lower your salary is likely to be. There is, this is especially true for women. So in another study, it was found that many employees believe that aggressive managers who blame others when things go wrong are more likely to get promoted than managers who feel guilty and accept responsibility for failure. A belief like this certainly encourages harsh speech at work. Action due to unfulfilled needs. This one is the aversion, right? Loba, dosa. Okay. Now we take it out on the person because you feel that he or she is to blame. This is usually the case with harsh speech. And many times we rationalize the harsh speech because we feel that we are doing it for that person's benefit. In fact, harsh speech caused by this motivation have caused quite a number of failure in marriages. We usually let out on and blame the closest person to us when things go wrong. That is usually our spouse after all. So because the marriage comes with a basket full of expectations and wanting, then our spouse takes the lead in the blame game. When the expectations are not met, you have unmet needs, and that arises aversion and harsh speech results. Action prompted by pre-existing negative mental states. Now, this is more complicated because it is both an action to get something, craving, as well as an action due to unfulfilled needs. Dosa, hatred. For instance, bullying. Okay. Studies have shown that people who bully others are likely to have experienced some stressful or traumatic events in their lives and have more likely experienced being bullied or have difficult home lives. As a result, they have problems with anger management. Some may have depression, anxiety, or emotional problems. Some call this emotional baggage. As practicing Buddhists, right, we do not keep baggage. We go the opposite way. We let go. Even when a person is not naturally inclined towards such behavior, a desperation for acceptance can make a person succumb to peer pressure, to verbally abuse others. At the same time, the act of bullying itself is an expression of unmet needs, which is love, safety, and happiness, both within and outside home life. And lastly, harsh speech is very often prompted as a retaliation to similar speech that is directed at us. This is also an expression of unskillful needs. The need for respect, understanding, or just basic courtesy. The need for communication that is not harsh. So, after saying so much, right, essentially, these four motivations behind harsh speech can therefore be reduced to just two motivations. Which one? Yeah, action to meet one's needs or a verbal expression of unmet needs, right? Needs come from that one thing. And then aversion arises when you don't get what you want. And where is that craving found in the Four Noble Truths? Okay, as Buddhists, we all must start with the Four Noble Truths. Yep, the second Noble Truth. Now, this second Noble Truth talks about the cause of suffering, that craving for being and wanting, the bhava tanha, and that craving for non-being, the vibhava tanha. And who wants and who does not want? Who likes and does not like? It is that ego, that sense of self. People who have bigger ego also suffer more. The need to control external circumstances when things do not go their way. They react more. On another note, what happens if there are times when speech may appear to be harsh, but the intention behind them are not meant to be that way? Now, Mei Shi Kiao, she is a Thai nun, had extraordinary psychic powers. When she meditated, she would have visions of other realms and communications with their inhabitants. Easy for her to think that she's attained because of these powers. But we all know, right? This does not equate to attainment, as attainment is equated to letting go of fetters and not about acquiring something or go somewhere. Now, Ajahn Mahabua who came into contact with Mei Shikiao in later life, realized that she does not have control over her mind as yet. He advised her to do right concentration under the Noble Eightfold Path and not be disturbed by visions and adventure. She refused and argued with her teacher. She repeatedly refused to listen. Now Ajahn Mahabua then raised his voice, uttered harsh and fiery words, and ordered her to leave and never return. Mishi Kiao left in tears and was devastated. But her teacher did this out of good intentions. Her ego was getting larger, and without these harsh speech, Mishi Kiao would never have come out of her delusion. She then reflected on her actions and eventually realized that her own conceited attitude was to blame. And because of this, she was determined to redeem herself and later perpetuated the truth. Not everyone is like her, as most do not self reflect and instead get angry and hold a grudge. There is this kind of speech called nigeha, which is defined as this. However, from the audience point of view, nigeha and parusawacha may seem exactly alike. Now, the difference between them lies entirely in the intention behind the harsh speech. Is the intention to reform or to wound or a crude way of self-expression? Only a teacher or a mentor that is skilled in Dharma and a bit of psychology might have the ability to use harsh speech to train and counsel others. Now, the other example is Ajahn Chah, right? Now, his speech could sometimes be coarse and seemingly hurtful, but the effect on his disciples was beneficial. Now, on the flip side, a gentle remark with evil intentions will cause more harm than words spoken harshly. And this was what ancient kings used to say when ordering executions. Now, apart from the two exceptions, all these verbal actions are as the Buddha described. Is it not? It's rough, it's hard, it's hurtful to others, offensive to others, all right? And generally unconducive to concentration. They are defined by intentions behind them, which are based on just two things, correct? Wanting, bhava tanha, and aversion that arises in not getting what you want, vibhava tanha. The important thing to note is that in most cases, we commit harsh speech because we do not know how to handle a situation. We will explore this next week when I touch on the skills. Now, next, this is important. Why we should avoid harsh speech. Now, brothers and sisters, whatever your intention or motivation, harsh speech is never fruitful. Even if we do get what we want with harsh speech, it is never given willingly or with goodwill. With harsh speech, conflicts will never get resolved to the satisfaction of both parties. Instead, it causes conflicts. And if there is already conflict, harsh speech will make it worse. Now, both speaker and receiver end up experiencing only negative mental states like these. This is why, in all my years of practice, I find it hard to reconcile a couple. All right? 29 years as a divorce lawyer, I have only seen two cases where parties actually reconciled. Emotional baggage does not come out of the blue. More often than not, clients remember what was said to them like years and years ago. The wound is very deep. The Chinese saying, right? Once your words come out, even four horses cannot get them back. 一言既出呢，驷马难追. Now, when people hear themselves judged, criticized, or analyzed, they see it as an outright or implied accusation that they are in the wrong. Speech targeted at a person's fault is very personal and cause defensiveness and very often retaliation, also in the form of harsh speech. There you are, right? A quarrel. Now, let's look at this dialogue between husband and wife. Please read this on your own. In our everyday life, we meet with conflict very often. The kind of conflict, like this one, they are not actual quarrels, but exchanges of very hurtful, sarcastic remarks. Right? It falls within the definition of harsh speech given by the Buddha. If they talk like this all the time, they are heading for divorce. It is rough, it is hard, it is hurtful, and it is offensive. It provokes anger and certainly not conducive to concentration. You think either the husband and wife can meditate after that? Usually in harsh speech, there's a lot of fault finding, like in the example here, which puts a person on the defensive and usually makes him justify himself and push the blame back to the speaker, and in the process, arousing negative emotions like anger and resentment. Now, harsh speech is often committed when you blame the person for your unmet needs, right? And not only that, you also blame the person for the negative mental states that arise because of your unmet needs. So when the mind is filled with negativities, empathy cannot arise. And with no empathy, the reviewer of harsh speech will not have a chance of having his needs heard. At the same time, it is difficult for the speaker to express his own needs when the mind is directed at finding fault with the others. It is very difficult to resolve conflict this way because, brothers and sisters, an angry mind can sing. So can a calm mind, but the thoughts are all different. So, the example that I gave you, correct? The contention is just of over keeping the home clean. That's all there is to it. The wife assumes that the husband wanted her to clean up after him, and what he did not want to clean, when he did not want to clean the dishes, she assumed that he dismissed her wishes when all she wanted was this, isn't it? And the husband reacted to her assumption with one of his own, that she was obsessive with house cleaning, and he became defensive when all he wanted to say was this. And unfortunately, their needs not properly communicated at any time during the dialogue. We will see what is the proper way of communicating in the next section on how to reduce harsh speech. Now, what we have seen in a form of bickering that is commonly found in households and among relatives, friends, and even at the workplace, right? At the other end of the scale, harsh speech can lead to war and loss of lives. In his book, Leaving Nonviolent Communication, Marshall Rosenberg gave an example where two tribes in Nigeria had legitimate grievances but failed to connect with one another. Now, both sides were filled with their own suffering due to unmet needs and blamed the other side for suffering, for their own suffering and for what they had gone through. Accusations along these lines flew back and forth between the two tribes, leading to a war that saw 1/4 of the population killed. Harsh speech therefore prevented both sides from communicating their needs to each other, which was simply this: which is very different from what they said. Thus, is it possible to use speech that appears to be harsh but not brought on by either unwholesome or wholesome intentions? Brothers and sisters, this is not the way to go for two reasons. Number one, speech spoken this way can develop into a habit, which means that you may end up adopting this manner of speaking whether you mean it or not. For example, like I give you an example, phone calls. I always know when my friend is answering a phone call from the husband because she sounds different. It would be like this. Hello, hello. Yeah. I'm busy now, busy now. And then she puts down the phone. I also know when she's answering a phone call from a client. It sounds like this. Yes, hello. Can I call you back later? I'm busy right now. Give me 5 minutes. See the difference? Now, for the second reason why we should not have this habit, it may appear to be comically neutral action, right? Because your intention is neither wholesome nor unwholesome. But more often than that, the speech carries an element of ill will, no matter how slight it is. This also applies to swearing. When you meditate and when your mind is calm and very kind, you have a non-judgmental mind, speech will not come out like that. Now, researchers studied the last word of flight crews on the black box recordings made just before the planes crashed. Overwhelmingly, the last thing the pilots and co-pilots said was what? Oh shit. Now, a lot of people believe that there's nothing wrong with swearing. In fact, a lot of articles claim that swearing is good for the health because it helps to release pent up emotions. What rubbish, right? When you swear on a regular basis, what do you think will happen when you use harsh speech on someone? The amount of profanities will shoot high, sky high, and you will come across as even more hostile and intimidating. Now we see the repercussions of harsh speech on the person who receives it. Now, physical abuse is always thought to impose more harm than verbal abuse. But many studies have shown that verbal aggression and abuse can also cause great psychological damage when the person subjected to harsh speech does not have the power to avoid it or to withdraw from it. It applies not only to children but also to adults. I have seen female clients who suffer from low self esteem as victims of verbal abuse. That includes cursing. Actually, it's quite common in Singapore divorce cases. Words such as ugly, you're stupid, your parents are also stupid, why are you so useless, inefficient, etc., etc. Now, John Garman, a professor in psychology, studies the positive and negative exchanges between spouses. He puts it at a ratio of 5 to 1, meaning it takes 5 good things or exchanges to lessen the impact of one bad one. That does not include canceling out the memory of the negative event. So this shows that it's easier to forgive than to forget. And that contributes to what I call emotional baggage. Now, researchers have found a link between the way employees are treated by managers and their health. Workers were treated unjustly, including being subject to harsh speech, had a 41% higher risk of sickness, absence than those who are treated well. Now, a child suffers from verbal abuse, exhibits short term effects like this: inferiority complex, deterioration of physical and mental performance. Okay, now let me just elaborate a bit. If the verbal abuse is allowed to continue on a regular basis, the child will suffer from long-term effects such as health issues. As a child tends to overeat or stop eating, affect growth and development of bones, muscles, and vital organs. Will also suffer from low self-confidence, negative outlook in life, addiction to alcohol and drugs, and antisocial tendencies. A professor at Harvard Medical School found that when a child is brought into a safe, attentive, and nurturing environment, the child's brain develops normally. But when born into one which is either unsupportive or hostile, the brain does not develop as well. Now, which part of the brain is affected? First, you have the corpus callosum, which is the breach of nervous tissues that allows communication between two sides of the brain, and the hippocampus, which is involved in memory processes, limbic system, a group of interconnected deep brain structures. Other studies also point to structural change in the gray meteor of the brain where there is verbal abuse. Harsh speech, repeatedly pursued, developed, and cultivated, is conducive to hell, to the animal realm, and to the sphere of afflicted spirits. For one reborn as a human, all right, being harsh speech at minimum conduces to disagreeable sounds. Can you imagine what kind of mind one has to communicate in harsh speech? The mental energy is very dense and gross, right? So we shall stop here. I do not want to give you an overload. So for next week, we will then examine how we can reduce harsh speech. All right.